I have a feeling, there we go. Wonderful to be here. Gilberto, gracias por la oportunidad to be with you today. That's about all my español. So I'm really pleased to be here. This is an exciting space, the payment space. I'm not going to talk much about payments. It would be presumptuous of me to stand in front of a group of executives from MasterCard and bankers from across Latin America and tell you about payments. But instead, perhaps I will challenge you a little bit with some thoughts from the edges of your space, things that I am paying attention to that I think might be somehow relevant directly or tangentially to what you're doing. But then talk more about how. How do we attempt to invest in an environment that Gilberto laid out, one in which is changing very quickly, faster than it has ever changed before. But before I do that, I wanted to thank all of you for actually being here, because it's difficult to take 2 days out from your normal course of business. Work is like a gas. It expands to fill the available space. So there's always too much to do. We will never have enough time to take, well, I don't have time, I'd go to that thing, but it's really important that you come here, because part of being innovative, part of being strategic is being strategically unfocused. It is having the discipline to be strategically unfocused, which means taking yourself out of a space, out of your regular day-to-day flow into new contexts, meeting new people, because that's the only place you're going to find new ideas. If you always look in the same places, you're liable to find the same ideas. So I commend all of you for being here. Also, I used un poquito of my limited español. Mi familia, nosotros estudiamos español ahora porque es esencial por el futuro. Y about 2 years ago, I took my family, I have 2 small children, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 5-year-old. I took them down to Colombia to visit some very good friends. I've spent a lot of time in Colombia, a wonderful country. Let's hear it for Colombia. All right, yeah, see, I heard a boo over here somewhere. Where are my friends from Panama? No, just kidding, just kidding. So I had them down in Colombia, wonderful country. Last year we were in San Miguel de Allende for a month, in Mexico, hear it from Mexico, okay. And I pointed at some cows. I was feeling pretty good about myself. I'd learned a little bit of Espanol. I pointed at some cows and I said, look, Jolie, she was 3 at the time. I said, look, Jolie, los vacas. And she looked up at me and said, las vacas. And I thought, okay, I gotta learn this language. This is embarrassing. So the title of the presentation for some reason is Innovation Paradox. And I have to admit, I did not come up with that title, and MasterCard didn't either. I did this series of lectures a few years ago, and some journalist in Brazil, I think, came up with the title Innovation Paradox, and somehow it stuck. So the idea of the paradox is we live in the short term, in the near term. We have to manage performance for the near term, but we also must invest for the long term. And as all of you know, this makes perfect sense. It's obvious. Of course we have to invest for the long term. Every idiot knows that. But it's incredibly difficult. If you have a brand new idea, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of them here at the program, you'll run back to the office and you'll share your brand new idea, which you've never tried before. You have no idea if it will work. And sitting next to you is a fellow who is pitching a concept for resources, and he has 30 years of data that proves that this works. Because we've been doing it for 30 years, and in one side goes money, and in the other side goes more money. Comes more money. So he has 30 years of data that proves that that works. Now you have your new idea. How many years of data do you have to prove that that works? Nada. You've got nothing. So this is why it's so difficult to invest for the long term and the short term. And the reason that I question my own title, Innovation Paradox, is it's not really a paradox. It's just something we have to do. It's something we have to figure out. It's incredibly difficult. But it's even more difficult today than it has ever been before. I won't go into all of the reasons why, but I'll give you a hint. Today is the slowest pace of change that you will experience for the rest of your life. I want you to think about that for a second, because we should all get despondent and go home and, I don't know, cry or something. This is horrible. The slowest pace of change for the rest of your life, and yet the pace of change today is faster than it has been in any of our lives. So the next time your mother says to you, "Why are you working so hard? Gilberto, why are you working so hard?" And you can tell your mother, "Mama, because Professor Wolcott told me that competition is harder today than it has ever been before." And that is true. There are a lot of data that support the fact that competition is a lot harder today than it was 20 years ago. So we have to run harder. And the reason we have this paradox is very simple. It's a matter of economics. If you do something and make a lot of money at it, what do other people do? They copy you. They do the same thing, and it drives price to marginal cost and eliminates all profitability. So therefore, we absolutely must innovate, and today we must innovate faster than ever before. So this is the basic paradox we face. So with that in mind, I want to get us moving by thinking about the success trap. So I like to start with success that leads to failure. Many of you are familiar with this company, Government Motors. You've probably heard of Government Motors. You've probably heard of all of these companies too. All of these companies are on the screen for two reasons. Number one, they've all had a near-death experience. Some are dead, some have recovered, but nonetheless, they've all had a near-death experience. Number two, they were all the very best company on the planet in what they did for decades. Literally for decades, they were the gold standard company worldwide. People looked at them and said, if we could just be like Pan Am. By the way, that was an airline, in case you don't remember. So how could this happen? I ask this often when audiences all over the world, how can this happen? How can you be at the top of the global hierarchy and come near death? And we have long conversation about why, and one word that always seems to come up is the word complacency. And I understand what people mean when they say complacency. I get it, and I kind of agree, but I don't entirely agree with the word, because the word gives the wrong impression. The word gives the impression that, oh, everything's going great. Hey, let's knock off at 3 p.m. and go play golf for a while, because the money's coming in, everything's going to be fine. That's not what was going on at these companies. I've talked to many people at a number of these companies when things were hitting the rocks, and why that was happening and how that was happening. And it was not that they weren't working hard. They were working very hard. And they had some of the smartest people. In fact, when IBM hit the rocks in 1992-93, most people don't remember how bad things were at IBM at that point. Lou Gerstner was hired to break up the company and sell off the parts. That's how bad it was. In 1992, IBM had the third highest corporate R&D budget on the planet. It wasn't that they weren't innovating. By the way, at that time, they were doing research that led to a Nobel Prize. A Nobel Prize. Anybody in here have a Nobel Prize? So it wasn't that they weren't innovating, but somehow they weren't translating that innovation into relevant products and services that people would pay them for in the right time and place. So here's what was really going on at these companies. So you do well for 30 years, everything's fine, you're doing great at what you're doing, and then along comes a quarter where you're not going to quite hit your numbers. And the memo goes around from the chief financial officer's office, and the chairs start turning faster, and everybody's wound up. Oh my gosh, we're not going to hit our numbers. And guess what happens? They all muster. They all get together and they all figure it out. And they do two things. And this is what all businesses are. They're revenues and costs. And so what all businesses do is, number one, you've seen this, they start cutting costs immediately, right? They get travel moratoriums. Have you ever heard of those travel moratoriums? How do you become $1 billion company and have a travel moratorium? Really? Anyway, I get it. So they cut all the costs they can cut in the near term, and they sell as much as possible. Look, you guys go out and just cut your costs, whatever it takes, get those contracts signed by the end of the quarter. And guess what happens? It works. That first time, it kind of works, and everybody feels good. We mustered, the team got together, and we figured it out. Now, when that process happens in a normal business cycle, a down cycle, and we're going to have an up cycle if we're in a cyclical business, then that's probably okay. We'll pick back up, things will pick up, nat gas prices will go to whatever it is, and we'll be okay. The problem is when the paradigm is shifting, that doesn't work anymore. You get to another quarter and the same thing happens. You cut, and you sell, and you don't quite hit your numbers. And then you hit another quarter where you don't quite hit your number. Why? Because you're doing more of what you've done in the past. You're doing more of what you're already doing. And if the paradigm is shifting, that won't be good enough anymore. That was what was happening at these companies. They were great at what they were great at, and the world changed. So you've all heard of this company, Kodak, and I probably don't need to describe the fact that they invented digital imaging for all intents and purposes. They were ahead of everybody else. They buried it because they had the monopoly, near monopoly, it was a duopoly, near monopoly position in chemical-based film. You've heard the story. They went bankrupt a couple of times. They're still around, but it's a small rump company making good money on that small company, but they will never be Kodak again. What most people don't know about this story is that there's another company in Japan called Fuji. You might remember Fuji. There were Kodak and Fuji was the doppelganger of Kodak in Japan. They had the dominant market share in Japan and a little bit of the market share in North America. What most people don't know is that Fuji is a thriving company today. It is bigger and more profitable. I don't have time to go into all of the things that they did in order to achieve this, but I bring this up to share the fact that we can make it through disruption. There are tangible, large company examples from the past where people have made it through disruption and remained relevant and powerful and successful. So something else is going on here. It's not just relevance. It's not just pace of change between competitors. So this is AT&T and Verizon. About 4 years ago, I was working with AT&T University and doing a lot of sessions with their top 350 leaders. And without going into the whole story, we were assessing how innovative they thought they were across all the ways they do business. This is one of the methodologies that we use at Kellogg. So we were assessing how innovative they thought they were against all of the things they do at AT&T in 5 different divisions. And the first iteration of this methodology came back, and they looked really good. They looked like they were knocking the cover off the ball from an innovation perspective. Like, man, everything is great here. You don't need me. And by the way, they would be perfectly fine with me telling you this because they tell this story now too. And so I'm trying to figure out the initial data, and the leader of AT&T University is sitting there with me, and he looks at it and he says, I know exactly what's going on. They're comparing themselves with the competitor in their head, which is Verizon. So every question they're thinking about, how innovative am I compared to Verizon? Okay, well, you can get a pretty good score because we're competing head to head. By the way, your biggest threats and your biggest opportunities are never going to come from your direct competitors. Now, are there big threats that come from your direct competitors? Absolutely. But your biggest threats and opportunities come at the periphery of your markets. They come at the edges. They don't come from your direct competitors. Why? Well, number one, they already know everything you're doing. Okay? Now, I don't know if this is news to anybody. Relax. Your competitors know everything you're doing. Okay? Oh, no, we have some confidential projects in the back room. All right, get over it. And you know what? You know everything they're doing. Right? You go to the same conferences, you read the same publications, you hire the same people. That's called incest. It doesn't work. Now, I get why you need people with expertise, okay? I'm being a little flip. But my point is, your big threats and opportunities happen at the edges of your market. So here's what was going on here. I said to my friends at AT&T, I get you guys are doing great with the innovation thing. You know, let me ask a question. If Google didn't need you, do you think they would send a check? The answer was, oh, no, of course not. Well, what do you mean they don't need us? We have the pipes. And then one of the executives raised her hand and she said, you know, in my market in Kansas City, Google is building out fiber across an entire neighborhood, and their plan is to do it across the whole city eventually. And I said, aha. It's a little bit of a problem. So part of the issue here was that is the competitor. Now, Verizon's still a competitor, keep your eye on them, but that is the competitor, and unfortunately also the customer, and also the collaborator. In technology, we call this frenemies. This is my frenemy, and we all smile and act like we like each other. Now, here's another example, Walmart. Who's the Walmart of the 21st century? Go ahead and say it. Amazon, exactamente. That is the competitor they're worried about, and they know that today. It took them a little while to figure that out. It did not take Amazon very long to figure that out. So that is their competitor going forward, and they have to think about that. So let's go back to this success trap issue. There's something else going on here. As we go from being a successful entrepreneur, and every one of your companies started at some point with 1 or 2 people around a coffee table deciding to start a company. And then you become a successful company with 1,000 or 10,000 employees. Fantastico. Congratulations. You create structure and process to drive efficiency. We need to do this. This is our job. That's how we remain competitive. And by the way, it takes a lot of innovation to be exceptionally efficient. But there's a problem with efficiency. That sounds like a crazy question, but what could be the problem with efficiency? Because that makes us better. We have to do it to stay ahead. But here's the problem, and this is an incredible issue. This is the crux of the matter, why some people call this the innovation paradox. Now think about this. The better and better you get at doing whatever you do, and I'm sure you're very good at it, the better and better you get at doing that, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The more finely tuned every process, every hiring decision, every cultural factor, every resource allocation decision is at doing this, the harder it is to do that. And in a competitive economy, eventually we will be forced to do something else because the customers will require something else. Now think about this again. Every decision we make, it looks like the right decision. We're making the decision to fine-tune our organization to be exceptional at doing this. That's how we win the game. That's how we make money. But it makes it harder to do something else. And this is the balance we have to try and hit. As some people have called it, the ambidextrous organization. We must have the ability to do both. If you don't have a short term, then you don't have a long term. But if you only manage for the short term, eventually you won't have a long term because the paradigm will shift. So this is the fundamental issue we face with driving efficiency and honing our core business. So I'm going to pick on this wonderful company. I have some very good friends there. They've made a lot of progress the past 3 or 4 years, really aggressively moving out in a space that traditionally hadn't changed much. Insurance, it's not supposed to change much. By the way, how many of you would like an innovative surgeon? Anybody want an innovative surgeon? Oh, no. Innovate on somebody else first. Right? So that's innovation is similar in banking, similar in payments, similar in insurance. But it's happening to all of us, and we have to figure out how to adjust. And so a lot of people maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago looked at Allstate and the other big incumbent insurers and said, you guys need to go online. How come you're not online? You idiots aren't online. Well, they were right in the sense that along came this online channel, and in 6 years, the online channel, this was a few years ago, went from being 4% of auto insurance to 30% of auto insurance in 6 years. And Allstate wasn't in the game at that time. Now, we could look back at them and say, oh, that's horrible. They didn't plan for the future. They didn't see it coming. They saw it coming. They talked about it for years. And let's cut them some slack. Let's be fair. There are also some business reasons why they didn't pull the trigger. And at first, there were some not so good reasons. Like people said, well, that's not how we do things around here. See, son, what you have to understand, we're all about service. We have a direct contact with our customers, right? So we don't do things like online, computers, right? So that was early on, but they got over that. They got over that relatively quickly, as did the industry. But they had another poignant issue, a real issue, and that is I've built my entire business around agents, people who have businesses selling what I sell, and now we've got what's called channel conflict. channel conflict between my network of agents and this notion of selling direct to consumers online. And this is a real issue. Now, eventually what Allstate did to figure this problem out is things got so bad and the online channel was expanding so quickly that they acquired Esurance. And I think that was a good strategic move, and it's proven to be a very good strategic move. The question is not why did they have a hard time getting in, because there are a lot of reasons why it was a hard time getting in. The question I would ask is, could they have acted earlier? Could they have done things at low cost early on in order to be ready for this change, rather than waiting and then spending $1 billion in 2011 to buy Esurance? Now, this is a longer conversation than we have time for here, but the question is, could they have spent less money for greater reward by building a portfolio of options on the future? Okay, so right now I'm going to digress for a second. At Kellogg, my class is Innovation, Strategy, and Management, and I'm going to summarize my entire class in 2 sentences. And you must be thinking, wow, if he can summarize his class in 2 sentences, it must really suck. But in any case, I'll do it, all right? So the essence of innovation strategy is building a portfolio of options on the future. I say on the future, it's redundant, but I say it for emphasis. The essence of innovation strategy is building a portfolio of options. And we do this because no one can predict the future. If you think you can, then give up. If you can, then you've got a better career somewhere else. You make a lot of money doing pretty much anything. Nobody can predict the future. I can give you a lot of examples of people who've been horribly wrong, especially in the past 5 or 6 years. And not just in digital and media, but I mean mining, oil and gas, big industrial enterprises, banking, et cetera. So we cannot predict the future, which means we have uncertainty, which means, remember your finance class, we need portfolio diversification. And it's exactly the same thing with innovation. We need to have a lot of small experiments going on at relatively low cost, some of which will start to work out, and then we put a little bit more money into it as we start to get more data that prove that we have a good hypothesis, and then later we scale, translate, and scale. That's basically it for innovation strategy. The essence of innovation management is resolving uncertainty through a rational process. The essence of innovation management is resolving uncertainty through a rational process. Being innovative isn't all about having foosball tables in a big loft in Palo Alto with lots of kids on skateboards. I mean, you should have a process to resolve uncertainty in a rational way. Now, let me bring both of these together briefly in a guideline that I learned. I wish I had come up with this, I did not, from Ian McMillan and Rita Gunter McGrath. It's a brilliant statement. I want you to think about it. Maybe go to Canyon Ranch and meditate on it for a couple weeks. It's really deep. And this is, how do we deal with risk? Because if you're going to build a portfolio of options on the future, there's a risk involved in spending your money to buy those options, right? You're putting share owner money down in order to buy options on things that you don't know if they're going to work or not. Well, here's the way to think about it. Do not manage the rate of failure, manage the cost of failure. Let me say this again. Do not manage the rate of failure, manage the cost of failure. So let me explain what I mean. In our careers, we have been conditioned to worry about the rate of failure, the likelihood a new thing will succeed or fail. And we look at that new thing, and if it looks like it's unlikely to succeed, we don't want our name on it, because that's not how you get ahead. And I understand that, but you don't want your name on a lot of stuff that fails. That's probably a bad thing. But if all of us are looking at new things and saying, what's the likelihood that thing's going to work out, we're going to kill everything, because nothing is going to work out if it's truly new. In fact, there's an axiom in innovation, and that is, if there's no uncertainty, there's no innovation. No uncertainty equals no innovation. Okay, so if we're not allowed to manage the rate of failure, the likelihood something will succeed or fail in the early stage, what do? So we manage the cost of failure. Let's say I told you I have an investment opportunity with a 95% chance of failure. 95% chance of failure. How many of you might be interested in investing with me? If you are, let's talk at break, because I've got a lot of ideas for you. All right. All right, I get that. No one wants to raise their hand. Now, what if I said to you, I have an investment opportunity with a 95% chance of failure, but if you're right about it, it could be worth $1 billion to your company, and it's only going to cost $50,000 to find out. Now, how many of you might consider making that investment? That's called managing the cost of failure. So now we spent $50,000. We've learned something. We were, well, that was stupid, but okay, we learned something. Nobody lost their job, and we move on to the next thing. So this is how we have to think about building this portfolio of options and resolving uncertainty through a rational process. So the other thing I want us to do, and this is a perfect venue for this, being away, meeting a lot of new people. By the way, I was sitting with the prepaid team down here. I was having a great conversation with them. They're a wonderful team. It's an exciting space. Don't sit together. You know each other. And you seem to get along great. That's wonderful. You should be sitting, you know what? Get out of your seat and move over here. Do you know each other? Ma'am, do you know this fellow over here? No? Get out of your seat, walk over here and have a seat. Sí. Yeah, ahora. Vamos. Sí. Yeah. Now, at the next cycle, I want everybody to do that. Make it a priority to go out and meet somebody that you haven't met. That's why you're here, okay? You guys can see each other at the office all the time, right? I'm sorry to pick on you. You're a good guy. But the other thing is meet new trends, too. So remember I said everybody knows everything going on in your space? So look outside your space. So one of the things that I did is I chose 2 trends that I think have some relevance for you that might not be directly in the middle of payments or finance, but they're going to have a huge impact on the way people need to exchange value. That's why they care about credit cards or prepaids or banking. The exchange of value is what they're looking for. And here are a couple. So first of all, ownership versus access. You all know about this. But about 5 years ago, my firm, Clario Partners, was doing a big program with Castrol, the lubricants company, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. And one of the trends we were looking at was ownership versus access. At the time, you could do Zipcar, which is I have access to cars parked in certain spaces that I can use them for a few hours or a day and then get rid of it. Airbnb and Uber hadn't even been invented yet. And in the matter of a few years, they've upended 2 major industries. In fact, one of my friends, Jeff Semenchek, is the Chief Innovation Officer of Hyatt Corporation. And he told me the beginning of this year, he said, at the beginning of this year, Airbnb had more rooms available than the entire Hyatt Corporation worldwide. So this thing is upending a lot of factors. And I'll give you an example from my personal experience. I travel a lot. I travel so much that a couple years ago when Uber came out, I started using it and I said, wow, this is great. I don't have to find parking. I don't have to worry if I get in an accident, as long as no one's hurt, I get out and get in another car. There's no risk, right? I realized I had driven my vehicle 4,000 miles the prior year. So I said to my wife, I'm going to get rid of the car. Now, my wife, God bless her, doesn't like spending money. I got the right kind of wife, and it's wonderful. She does not like to spend money. So I actually had to do a spreadsheet to show her over 2 months that, in fact, it was a better idea for me to use Uber. But my point is, I don't have a car. She does, drives kids around and all. I do not have a car. What does that mean from a payment perspective? Well, I've gone from taking an aggregated payment to a banking institution for a lease for a car to doing it as needed small payments, relatively small payments. I've completely disaggregated my payment requirements. So one of the things that's happening with ownership versus access is the difference in the aggregation or disaggregation of payments, the who, what, when, where, and why it's going on. And here's another one a little bit further afield, and it might be difficult to imagine, well, how could distributed production relate to payments or banking? But if you think about it, you quickly come to recognition that, so, by the way, distributed production, think of 3D printing, accretive manufacturing where you can download a file and actually create a part with a piece of equipment. You're printing a part. You've seen this. a lot of people still think it's for baubles and bobbleheads and little plastic fun things for kids, but you might not know that General Electric and Rolls-Royce both have 3D printed parts in aircraft engines. So this is getting rather serious. So now if you start to think about a world where we have optimized our entire global supply chain for scale manufacturing at a distance, this is called China, by the way, scale manufacturing at a distance, and I'm picking on them, but it's really everybody, and now we're heading at the beginning of a world where things will be distributedly produced. This is a fundamental change, and it will impact the way people need to pay, where they need to pay, how they need to pay, and why they need to pay. Always ask that: who, what, when, where, how, why. And try and put the who and the why first. And I'll even go further than that. I was in Germany and Denmark a couple months ago with our friends from Exelon Corporation, the big energy company. And we were looking at their challenges with energy. They're a lot further along in some ways. They have an extreme case in many ways in the energy space. And one of the things we were seeing was microgrids. And in one of the towns in Germany where they have great control over their electrical grid, the CEO of this relatively small utility was saying, well, the next thing we're experimenting with is in a microgrid, 300 or 400 homes, homes will be able to sell power directly to their neighbors and never go to the grid. So if I have rooftop solar, for instance, and my neighbor doesn't, my neighbor can buy it directly from me, and it hasn't entered the grid. Which means it's not entering the banking system the way it has entered the banking system in the past, which means to me that maybe there's a payment issue or an exchange of value issue here, and that something might be changing. So what are the trends that might be relevant? Well, and how do we think about all these things and become this ambidextrous organization? This is a much bigger conversation than we have time for today. But what I decided to do was pick a few concepts to share with you to frame this challenge, maybe even give you a couple of ideas as to how to move forward. So first of all, think fortresses and ships. I'm quite serious about this. This is your core business or your core businesses. This is the stuff you do really well. And this is the ship. These are the ships that are out trying to find the future, trying to seek the gold. And they're not really exactly sure where they're even going or what they might find, but they're out trying to find it. The important point here is that these are two completely different environments. They take different processes, they take different metrics for success, they take different capital allocation procedures. When I hear a CEO say, well, you know what, son, we have the same rigorous evaluation for new projects as we do for our old existing business, I say, well, then you're doing it wrong. You're going to be in big trouble because there's no way that new concept can fight for resources against what you've been doing for 30 years. So we must have a different way to evaluate, allocate capital, et cetera. But here's the most important point. These are different people. There are some people who thrive here, who love getting the ball bearing perfect off the manufacturing line every time. You give them a plan, and they're going to execute the plan, and it's going to be exceptional, and they're going to come back the week later and say, okay, now what do you want me to do? Now, these people, they can deal with high uncertainty. In fact, they thrive in high uncertainty. They love looking for the new thing, trying to figure out where things are going next. I suspect a lot of you are interested in being in this boat, and that's part of the reason you're here, because you like to try and figure out where the world goes and get us there. Now, one is not better than the other. We need both. If we're going to have a sustainably successful company in the long run, we must have homes for both. Smart companies do not try to get everybody to be good at both. That's a waste of money. We try and help everybody understand why we need both. We try and help everybody understand the realities of operating in both sides. And most important, we help people figure out how to work together. Because if we come up with great concepts here and test them and get 3 customers that absolutely love what we're doing, but we can't transition it into a business unit and scale it up, then it doesn't matter for the company. And by the way, what we're finding in our research is that is the most difficult challenge companies are facing. The transition and scaling challenge, as we call it in a book of a few years ago called Grow From Within. So it's that challenge that is most the forefront of leaders in the innovation space these days. Now, another point I want to make about this is I want you to think about, if you haven't already, which one are you more of? Are you more the fortress, execute to plan, excellence, or are you more the ship, seeking the future? Because I can tell you, if you should be here and you end up here, it's a soul-sucking experience. And I mean that rather literally. You've probably seen people who are mismatched in their careers. Furthermore, if you take someone here and you put them here too long, and it's a good idea to cycle people back and forth, but not too long. You take somebody who should be here and you put them here too long, they can't handle it because they can't handle the uncertainty. They say, yesterday you told me to do that, today you're telling me to do this, do you know where this company's going? And the answer is on the ship, no, we don't. We really have no idea where this is going. That's the point. So I need you to figure out where you are. And more important, as a leader, what about your colleagues and peers? What about the people who report to you? So here's a list I want you to start. I want you to start keeping your eyes open for people who would be great in the ship. Because as a leader, you're going to need some of them. And they might not have the title innovation. If they do, great. Gary, I can't wait for your presentation later. Be very interested for that. But some people who want to be in the ship or be great at the ship don't necessarily have innovation in their title. So I want you to keep your eyes open for the people who could captain ships, because you will need them in the future. So this is about balance. It's not about one is better than the other. We become customer responsive, but you know, in this day and age, that's not good enough, because your customer is telling the same thing to your competition. So you have to figure out how to be customer leading. Where do they want us to go, how, et cetera. Traditionally, we've been very much inside out. Here are the things we're good at, here are the things we do, how can we do more of those and sell more of that stuff? But now we have to start thinking more about outside in. How do we learn from more spaces, from more people, track more trends, and translate those into implications for our business? Sometimes I have this question from people, Professor, should we be doing top-down or bottom-up? And I say the answer is yes. If you're going to do it right, you've got to do both. You've got to have the right top-down, you've got to have the right bottom-up opportunities to make innovation work. So, on to the next. How do we process ideas in our companies? We won't solve this today, but I want to make you aware of this, because I'm sure you've experienced it. Some of you still have scars as a result of this. In America, we've spent a lot of blood and treasure to be innocent until proven guilty, but for some reason, new ideas and organizations are guilty until proven innocent. Now, why is that? It kind of pisses me off. So you have a new idea here at this conference, and no, you don't think, you've never done it before. You're not even really sure what it is. But you go back to the office, and you've got some guts, so you share it with your colleagues. And what are some of the reactions to your new idea that your colleagues might have? Anybody, what are some of the reactions they might have? What? Skepticism, but what might they say? What are some things they might say? What's the ROI? I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea whether this thing will even work. How can I tell you an ROI? What other reactions? Come on, you've heard these things before. We don't do that. Well, that's not what we do here. That's not our business. That's been said many times. Well, the question is, maybe it should be our business. Are the customers going to want that eventually? Well, then that should be our business. But here's a great one. That'll never work. Well, that'll never work. And actually, in English, if you look it up, it's actually, that's the way you say it. That'll never work. There are other ways, but we all say, that'll never work. And I love that one, because how do you know? First of all, I don't even know what this new idea is. And somehow you do, and you know it won't work. That makes no sense. Now, here's my #1 favorite response. I know you've all heard it before. We tried that before, and it didn't work. We tried that before, and it didn't work. I love this one. Why do I like this? Well, first of all, because I thought this was a new idea that you don't even know what it is, but somehow magically she does know what it is. She knows exactly what it is. And she knows that we did it 5 years ago and it didn't work. Now let's cut this person some slack. I think most people are trying to help. Most people want the company to succeed. So even if they're doing it in a rude way, They think they're helping you by telling, well, we tried that before, it didn't work. Don't go there, it'll blow up. But the issue is, so let's say that she's right. That's exactly what's in your head. And that thing was done 5 years ago and it didn't work. Is it possible the world has changed in the last 5 years? Apple Newton, 1993, Palm Pilot, 1998. Dismal failure, category-creating success. Now, there are lots of reasons why the Newton failed and the Palm Pilot succeeded. I won't go into, having to do with the product profile, the technology, the functionality. Let's ignore all of those factors. There was one factor that had absolutely nothing to do with the products themselves. It had to do with the change in consumer behavior related to portable, small portable electronics between 93 and 98. What was that big change? Between 93 and 98, small portable electronics, consumer behavior, mobile phones, exactly. Now think about this. In 1993 in the United States, if you had a mobile phone, it was called a car phone, okay? And it had a wire on it. And by the way, when you were in your car, if you got to a stop sign, even if you weren't on the phone, you'd pick up the phone and go like this so everybody could see that you had a mobile phone. By 1998, everybody had a mobile phone. And it fundamentally changed the behaviors and the expectations of consumers. So between 93 and 98, the world really had changed. So now, what do we do about this? Well, first of all, just be aware we do it. And think about how you react to other people's ideas and concepts and say, well, you know, that's a really exciting, interesting idea, but, you know, I think we might have done something similar to that. Julie did that. And you know what? Now it's your job. You've got to go and talk to Julie, because if you don't go talk to Julie and find out what they did 5 years ago, that's your fault. And so we'll become better as companies at accepting new ideas, and the culture will get better. That's great. But you know, the reality is, if you want to be an innovator, if you want to be a corporate entrepreneur, it will always be difficult. It'll always be difficult to do new things, so you have to have a thick skin. And so another thing I want you to think about when you're sharing your new ideas, number one, try and take your ego out of it. That's very hard, because it's your idea, it's your baby, and no one likes to hear they might have an ugly baby. But let's face it, some babies are more attractive than others. So try and take your ego out of it. Step back and ask yourself the question, what is the kernel of insight in that person's rejection of my idea? What is the thing I could learn from this person's criticism? And then go out and learn it. So what's this? Well, we all know what this is. This is a map of the world. And it's very uncomfortable, isn't it? Now, except for my friends in Argentina, they love this map. This is fantastico. Now, here's what's interesting. There is nothing wrong with this map. This is as accurate as any map you've ever seen in your life, but it doesn't feel right. This is what I call an orthodoxy. An orthodoxy is a view we have of the world where we believe it must be like that, even though it doesn't violate the laws of physics to do something else. So it's an observation about the world we believe must be like that, even though it doesn't violate the laws of physics to try something else. So let me give you an example of this. Everybody knows that analog photography is dead, right? And it's all about digital. And especially the young people. I've started a few years ago, I started saying the younger generation. And it really kills me. But in any case, they're younger, so the younger generation. The younger generation is all about digital, right? Okay, I get that. Anybody heard of this company, Lomography? Anybody heard of Lomography? So just a few of you. Well, you're not the target audience, I hate to say. Lomography is an all analog camera company. They make analog film and analog cameras. They're about $100 million a year in revenues this year, very profitable, growing fast. By the way, I'm not recommending you go out and start an analog camera company. That's not my point. But here's the kicker. Their core market is people under the age of 25. Now, this is a little peculiar. What's going on here? Well, there's a lot of depth to this, but briefly, young people have grown up sharing everything about themselves. It's always all about self-expression, probably too much about self-expression. So they've grown up in that environment. They've grown up with digital. Digital is natural. It's great, but it's all about digital. Now here comes this new thing. Did you hear about analog photography? It's a camera. It's an old Italian word, I think. Camera. You open the back, you put this thing in, and if you screw it up, that's it. And when you only have 24 pictures, and when it's done, it's done. Now, it's tactile. It's an artisanal thing. They get to use their hands to create physical artifacts. They get to share what they've created. The Lomography website has no pictures of their products in the front of the site. It's all about the expressions of their community, of their users, who are part of this Lomography community. So the reason I share this is, when you face an orthodoxy in your business, when you're trying to share a new idea, I want you to start to be very aware when you're hitting an orthodoxy. An orthodoxy, again, is something that everybody believes the world must be like that, but it's not, but it doesn't violate the laws of physics to do something else. And the reason it's important to recognize an orthodoxy when you're facing it is, you can't just fight it with data. You can't just fight it with a rational argument. You need to do that, but that's not going to be enough. Part of the reason is that there's an emotional factor. Remember the map? There is an emotional factor to orthodoxies. So when you're facing an orthodoxy, one way to realize that you've now waded into dangerous territory is that other people start to have emotional reactions to your arguments. They sit up in their chair, they start to drool and froth at the mouth, and they start to say things that maybe don't make a lot of sense to you. They're tied to the old paradigm. So how do we start to address orthodoxies? Don't try and hit them dead center and prove them wrong. That usually doesn't work at first. At first, the only thing you should try and do is create doubt. When you're facing an orthodoxy, start by trying to create doubt. Find some data somewhere in the world that supports that maybe our perspective isn't 100% airtight. So start by creating doubt. Second thing, peripheries, orthodoxies. I'm going to use electric vehicles as an example. The entire lubrication industry had for many years ignored electric vehicles, and this is peculiar because many might not know this, but electric vehicles take no lubrication. A little grease on the wheels, that's it. So you'd think they'd be a little concerned about this, but for a long time they weren't, and for a good reason. 120 years of data that proves that electric vehicles will never happen. Well, that might be changing today. Now, I mentioned our friends at Castrol earlier, the big global lubricants company, and in 2010 they asked us to help them think about where might the world be in 2020 or 2025, so we can build a portfolio of options in the future. This is a smart question. Now, electric vehicles was just one of the topics, one of many topics. And so we did a few things. One thing was we took the leadership team out to Silicon Valley, and we had a variety of speakers, working sessions with them, not speak and then leave the room, but really working with external people. And one of them was Steve Jurvetson from Draper Fisher Jurvetson, one of the top VCs in the world, a big supporter of Tesla. Now remember, this was in 2010. And in 2010, it wasn't clear that Tesla would survive. And this car hadn't launched yet. This one had. That was his car, by the way, Laughing Out Loud Oil. He drove it around Silicon Valley. It was very fun. And he got up and he said to Castrol, my job is to put you out of business. And they all laughed. And he said, it's funny, but I'm serious. So this is the S-Class. You've probably seen them tooling around town. They get 200 to 300 miles on one charge. Now, what's the main reason why most people don't want to buy an electric vehicle? Well, it's called range anxiety. We even have a medical term for it, range anxiety. People are worried for some reason that they're going to be driving through the Mojave Desert and run out of power and die a horrible death because there are no charging stations. My God, no charging stations. Now, let's think about this. And I know a lot of people putting a lot of money into charging stations right now. And I think it's a red herring. There are some reasons why you might want to invest in charging stations, but not at the scale that most people think. Why? Well, how many of you have a garage? Anybody in here have a garage at your house? Only 7 people. Wow, this is... How many of you have a bank account? Let's start. Okay, so not all of us have a garage, but most of us have a place we put our vehicle, right? How many of you can plug stuff in your garage? Okay. How many of you can fill up your petrol car in your garage? Nada. So what's going on here? People are taking the old paradigm and cramming the new thing into it. What they're thinking is, oh my gosh, it takes an hour and a half to charge this thing up. They're thinking, I'm going to have to drive into a gas station, plug my car in, and sit there, read a magazine for an hour and a half. That's not what's going to happen. Now, what happens when this vehicle can get 1,000 miles on one charge? What happens then? It changes the paradigm. So the paradigm is shifting, but we have not yet changed the way we see the world. And this is a fundamental problem. Now, in China, these electric two-wheelers, they're not very effective, they're low efficiency, but they're cheap, and they do the job. They get me from my apartment to my factory or to my office building through horrid Beijing traffic. And so this is the essence of disruption. It's a junkier product. It's a worse product. Think Square at the beginning of its development. Everybody said, oh, it's not safe. It's not safe. It's horribly unsafe. Oh, and no one's going to want to do that. It's a junkier product that some people do want to do because they have a different set of parameters, use cases, factors. And then over time, some of them, not picking on Square, but some of them get better. And eventually they incur into your core market and eat your lunch. And this is the punchline here. All of these vehicles were all electric cars for sale in China in 2010. In 2010, these were all for sale, made and sold in China. Now, I would not want to be caught dead in any of them because you'd probably be caught dead. I mean, they're really unsafe. But do you think some of them might figure it out and get better and better and eventually incur into your core market? So this is what I mean by the periphery. These are happening at the edges of the market. So we had this session with Castrol, and after Steve Jurvetson was done speaking and scaring people a little bit, these were his slides, by the way, I then did a thought experiment. And I'd ask you to do this similar thought experiment for your own business. I said, okay, it's 2010. You've asked us where the world might be in 10 or 15 years. Let's imagine it's the year 2000, 10 years ago. And we're doing this exercise. How many global experts in the auto industry in the year 2000 expected the hybrid engine to amount to anything? And by the way, about that time, the hybrid was being launched by Toyota. And the answer was nobody, not even Toyota. In 2010, half of all passenger cars sold in Japan were hybrids. Okay, so we were wrong about that prediction. In the year 2000, how many experts in the global auto industry would have expected that 2 major auto companies would be launching all-electric vehicles to the mass market in 2011? And the answer was, again, nobody. So then, at this point, Angela Strank, the CTO of the company at the time, raised her hand, and she said, you know what, Professor? 3 years ago, we had an industry-wide consortium that got together to determine when electric vehicles would become viable for the mass market. When would it pass the economic threshold to be viable for the mass market? And we agreed it would be 7 to 10 years at least. We all agreed 3 years ago it would be 7 to 10 years at least. It happened this year. So I said to them, you're 0 for 3. How many of you would like to bet the future of your company on that? That's the notion of building a portfolio of options on the future, because we cannot know where the future goes. Now, I've alluded to this before, peripheries. What do we do with this funny thing called peripheries? Well, what is this? It is, but it's not Red Bull. This is the predecessor product to Red Bull. This was a product that was made and sold in Thailand for almost 10 years for one purpose: to help Thai truck drivers and textile workers work longer hours. That's why it was invented. so that you wouldn't fall asleep behind the wheel while you're driving your truck. Now, somewhere along the line, some young guys, probably truck drivers, thought it would be cool to drink this in the nightclubs, to stay up till 5:30 for no apparent reason, and it was cool to do that, so everybody else started doing it. And then the guy who made this stuff said, well, we'll start selling it all over Southeast Asia. And then an Austrian guy showed up in a nightclub and said, wow, this stuff is pretty exciting. He did a partnership. He took it to Prague and Vienna and London and eventually got on a boat and went to the United States, and it became a multi-billion-dollar new category, the energy drink. Now, the reason I share this with you is imagine you are the CEO of Diageo, the big global spirits company, or you're the CEO of Coca-Cola. And you're looking at this, when is the point when you should know this is happening? And when is the point when you should do something about it? And these are two completely different questions. When is the point when you should know it's happening? When is the point when you should do something about it? Now, if your consumer insights marketing team doesn't know that those truck drivers are drinking this stuff to stop falling asleep at the wheel, and they don't know that, should you fire them and get a new team? Probably not. That's pretty obscure. We cannot know everything. But you know, once it's being sold all over Southeast Asia, we're active in Southeast Asia. We have products in Southeast Asia. We should probably know what's going on. Heaven forbid we don't know what's going on when it's happening in Prague and Vienna and London, and when it gets on a boat comes to the US. The second question is, when should we actually do something about it? Do we launch our own product? Do we go to the lab and say, hey, you know what, to marketing, I don't know if we're going to do this, but do some research, find out if this might work, find out why it's working in Southeast Asia, come up with a brand concept, don't spend a lot of money on it, manage the cost of failure. We don't know if we're going to do it, but be ready. Say to your R&D team, hey, go reverse engineer this product, figure out what's in it, come up with our own formulation, don't spend a lot of money, building a portfolio of options, so we're ready. Or do we just wait until it comes to the United States and creates a multi-billion-dollar brand new category and then spend a lot of money to muscle our way into the market? Well, that's exactly what all the incumbents did. They sat around and they waited until it was a billion-dollar category. To give you an idea, 6 months ago, Coca-Cola, wonderful company, brilliant company, Coca-Cola spent $2.1 billion to buy 17% of Monster. That's the second largest player. Coca-Cola, brilliant company, and I mean that sincerely, spent $2.1 billion to buy 17% of the second player because they had not built a portfolio of options on the future. So this is how I want you to start thinking about building your business and looking forward to the future and all this. And one hint I'll give you is think about the strategic frames, the areas that you see as growth opportunities for the company that aren't just adjacencies necessarily. This is one of the things we helped Castrol figure out. They said, what can we do beyond lubricants? Because the world will change, and eventually if somebody invents technology that does not require lubricants, they're not going to care how good our lubricants are. So how do we ensure we still have a thriving business? So with them, we developed a variety of potential futures, and they have set up innovation program and a corporate venture capital capability to make small investments in a few of these spaces to ensure their relevance in the future. I'm going to skip this just because of time. I want to keep us on time. And I want to share a couple quick stories before I conclude. First of all, being clear about what we're trying to accomplish is incredibly difficult to do. But it's essential because people only see the things for which they're looking. There are too many data points in the universe that hit us in any given moment to look at everything. Think of the Thai truck drivers in the nightclubs. We can't know everything. So your job as a leader is to identify the key essential things and encourage people to go out and find them. So this is a story from my group at Kellogg, the Kellogg Innovation Network, or the KIN. We're a bunch of innovation and growth leaders, mainly from big companies. We get together on a regular basis to share our problems. It's like a support group for innovators, and you need a support group. And about 7 years ago, this fellow, Bill Perry, the former Secretary of Defense under Bill Clinton, who's now a professor at Stanford again, came down to meet us. We were having a meeting at Cisco in their executive briefing center, and so Bill drove himself. He's a very unassuming, modest guy. He drove himself down to meet us at Cisco. And he was talking about managing innovation in big, complex organizations. Now, I have members like General Electric and Kraft and Motorola, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves. So I don't care what your company is. It's not bigger than the Pentagon, okay? So Bill comes in and he's speaking, and he gets to this story. He was brilliant. All he was doing was telling stories. And I said, Secretary Perry, I'm so sorry I have to cut you off to make a point. So the story was the following. Back in his first tour of duty in the Pentagon under the Carter administration, the world had a huge challenge. And that was the Soviet Empire had overwhelming conventional force superiority in Europe. And had they decided to roll their tanks across Western Europe, there was literally nothing we could have done about it except bomb or not bomb. Not a very good set of options. So Perry and others in the administration and outside said, we need to at least try to come up with solutions. So he went to DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This is where the military invests in crazy stuff like telekinesis. They have invested in that, hasn't worked out yet. And the internet, you've probably heard of that. And he said, what do you got? What's your best stuff? And they selected smart weapons, smart sensors, and stealth. Have you heard of this stuff? And he said, get it done in 4 years, which they did. Now, I cut him off at this point and I said, Secretary Perry, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I must point something out to my executives here in this room. You have on one slide, in less than 40 words, the grand challenge, the strategy, and the terms of engagement that helped. It was not the only factor, but that helped to bring down the Soviet Empire. Now, I looked at my executives and I said, which one of your CEOs could articulate the challenge, the strategy, in less than 40 words on one slide? And they all looked at their BlackBerries and the answer was not mine. Now, the critical point here is the higher you go in your career, the more people with whom you are communicating, the more important the mission, the more you must be simple and clear. Now, notice I did not say simplistic. I said simple, and there's a critical difference. It is hard to be succinct, but the more people with whom you are communicating, the bigger the objective, the more that must be very, very clear, because you're looking to understand mission relevance and mission clarity so that everybody understands the mission in which we're active. One more quick story before we conclude, and it has to do with peripheries. It has to do with orthodoxies. It has to do with how we live on planet Earth and being human. I mentioned before that people only see the things for which they're looking. Your job as a leader is to help focus them in the right directions, not tell them what to do, not tell them what the new idea is, but give them the right frame, the strategic frame within which to act, to find the opportunities for the future. Now, this issue of we only see what we're looking for is scientifically proven. Cognitive science has proven that we really only see the things for which we're looking because we've evolved in an environment with way too many data points hitting us at any given time. There's no way our brain could process all of them. So my favorite example of this from the history of science is from this fellow. This is Dr. Fleming. Many of you have heard the fun story about how Dr. Fleming discovered penicillin. He was a messy clinician, a messy researcher. He showed up in his laboratory one day. He was studying bacteria. He had these little glass dishes called Petri dishes. He looked in the Petri dish, and there was some stupid stuff that got in the dish that killed the bacteria. It was an accident. And he looked at the dish, and he said, aha, killed the bacteria. Penicillin. And thus was born antibiotics. The pharmaceutical industry, in many ways, was born in that insight. Now, most people look at this story, and they get completely the wrong insight. Most people look at this story and they say, aha, I get it. Innovation is about serendipity. It's about the chance event. Oh, thank goodness, I don't really have to work for this. I can just skip along and one day there'll be a new payment thing that pops up by accident. I say, aha, there it is. And I can win a Nobel Prize. The problem is that's exactly not what was going on in this story. What most people don't know is literally dozens of researchers had seen exactly the same thing happened for decades. For decades, researchers had walked into their laboratory and seen the stupid stuff in the petri dish that killed the bacteria, and they threw it out and they said, merde, and they started all over again. In the 1920s, there were two researchers who wrote an article to help their colleagues stop getting the stupid stuff in the petri dish that keeps killing the bacteria. And nobody figured it out. Why? Well, I think there are two reasons. Number one, Fleming was a visionary, creative guy. We have to give him credit for that. So there's that. But two, and this we can manage, two, Fleming served in World War I. As a result of serving in World War I, he saw thousands of people dying of infectious diseases. As a result of that experience, he decided to dedicate his career to understanding bacteria, not just to extend the bounds of science, which is a noble mission, but to understand bacteria specifically in order to help protect human beings from it. So when he saw what literally dozens of people had seen happen before, he was the one who uniquely saw. So my question to you in conclusion, at this conference, in your day-to-day work, in your personal life, if it's really important, pose it as a question. What are the questions you're asking? What are the things you're looking for? Because those are the things you're going to notice. If it's really important, sit down and try and pose it into a question, and you'll find that you might not understand the challenge as well as you thought. And also note that if other people don't know what you're looking for, it's very hard for them to help you find it. So, in conclusion, I'd like you, if you have a moment, to take a moment this evening over dinner after a few drinks. That's usually the best time. Not after more than 3 drinks, though. It's about the 2 to 3 drink threshold where you're the most creative and effective. I want you to take a piece of paper, literally take a piece of paper, not your smartphone, the oddly named smartphone. Smartphone, and they're in parentheses, and the name is dumb person, smartphone dumb person. I don't know if you knew that. Take a piece of paper and a pen or pencil and write down a couple questions that are critical for you that you are trying to answer, and I guarantee you, you are more likely to find the solutions. Thank you very much to MasterCard for having me here today, and I look forward to learning from you.